The credit card statement in my hands was shaking, and it wasn't from the Austin wind rattling the windows of our Westlake Hills home. $247 at Uchi Restaurant. Again. Third Thursday in a row. My name is Emerson Carter. I'm 29 years old, and for the past 5 years I've been building both a corporate law practice and what I thought was a solid marriage with Griffin. But staring at that American Express bill, everything I believed about my life was crumbling faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Griffin Carter, my husband, my business partner, the man who promised me forever, had been lying to my face for months. Those late nights expanding our tech company's client base weren't happening in boardrooms. They were happening in Austin's most romantic Japanese restaurant. And he wasn't dining alone. The cruelest irony of all was that I, a corporate lawyer who investigated financial fraud for a living, had missed the obvious signs until they were practically screaming at me through a credit card statement. $247 every Thursday. Same restaurant, same time. He thought he was clever. Honey, I need to work late again Thursday. Big potential client dinner. He'd kiss my forehead, grab his keys, and drive his Tesla down to South Austin, while I stayed home reviewing contracts, believing his lies like some naive fool. The man who once brought me coffee in bed every morning was now buying another woman $200 dinners every week. I sat in our marble kitchen, the same one we'd renovated last year, after arguing over cabinet colors like it mattered, like we had a future, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not heartbreak, not yet. Something sharper, focused, professional curiosity. When you've spent years unraveling corporate embezzlement cases, you learn how to spot patterns, how to follow trails others think they've hidden. And Griffin's trail was glowing like neon. I opened my laptop, my fingers steady despite the storm in my chest. His business credit card told a bigger story: Tiffany & Co. purchases totaling $8,000 in just 2 months. Nordstrom charges that didn't match a single item in my closet. A monthly payment of $1,500 to Palmer Architecture Consulting. Palmer Architecture. I dug into the public records. Monroe Palmer, 30 years old, architect, office in East Austin. LinkedIn profile: all smiles in vintage tees and chic blazers, golden hair falling effortlessly around her shoulders. And married. Married for 8 years to Staff Sergeant Marcus Palmer, currently deployed overseas. The pieces fell together like jagged shards of glass. Monroe had been playing house with my husband, while her own husband was serving our country in Afghanistan. Griffin wasn't just having an affair. He was bankrolling someone else's double life with money from our joint business account. I printed every receipt, every transfer, every scrap of evidence. By the time Griffin came home past midnight smelling of cologne, I'd never bought him. I was sitting on the sofa with a portfolio fat with documentation. "How was your evening, honey?" he asked, loosening his tie with that same charming smile that had once made me weak at the knees. "Productive," I murmured, shutting my laptop with a click that echoed like a gavel in my ears. He kissed my forehead and disappeared upstairs, never suspecting that his empire of lies had begun to collapse. That night, while the shower ran in our bathroom, I stared out the window into the dark hills and realized this wasn't just betrayal. This was war. And I wasn't going to file quiet divorce papers or slip away like a wounded wife. I was going to bring everything into the light. The next day I called in favors. Private investigators, forensic accountants, digital analysts. Within hours, Monroe's life was stripped bare in front of me. Crippling debts, a failing business. A woman desperate enough to leech from 2 men at once, one risking his life overseas, the other risking his company for her attention. And me, I was done being the naive one. If Griffin wanted to spend his Thursdays at Uchi, then I'd make sure the next reservation he walked into would be unforgettable. I called the restaurant. Private dining room, 6 people, Thursday night. Then I called his parents, Richard and Patricia Carter, our primary investors. They had always treated me like the daughter they never had. "There's someone very important I think you should meet," I told them sweetly. Next, I called Judge David Palmer, Monroe's father, and his wife Helen. I invited them to dinner to celebrate a supposed new business partnership. And finally, I contacted Marcus's base liaison, who revealed a devastating detail: Marcus was due home in 3 weeks for a surprise early return. By the time Griffin staggered into the kitchen that evening, exhausted from another meeting, the trap was already set. I smiled across the table, my heart steady, my plan sharper than any knife in that restaurant kitchen. "I've arranged something special for Thursday," I told him. The color drained from his face instantly. He didn't know the details yet, but he knew. Somewhere deep down, he knew his lies were about to come crashing down around him. On Thursday evening, the city glowed with its usual hum, streetlights flickering to life, traffic crawling across the bridges, couples laughing as they stepped out for dinner. But inside me, there was no laughter, no hesitation, only a pulse that beat like a drum of inevitability. I slipped into a navy dress that Griffin had once called his favorite, the irony sharp against my skin, and drove downtown to Uchi. The maitre d' greeted me warmly and led me toward the private dining room I'd reserved. The polished wooden doors opened and the stage was already set. A long table gleamed with white linens and delicate arrangements of orchids. 6 seats, 6 truths waiting to collide. Richard and Patricia were the first to arrive, Griffin's parents. Patricia kissed my cheek, her pearls brushing against my skin. "Darling, you didn't have to go to all this trouble," she said, her voice dripping with warmth. I smiled faintly. "You'll understand soon." Judge David Palmer and his wife Helen walked in next, their presence commanding. They shook my hand firmly, unaware of the storm about to descend. I caught the flicker of curiosity in Judge Palmer's eyes. He had no idea that his daughter's world was about to implode. The final players, of course, were still missing: Griffin and Monroe. They arrived together 20 minutes late, laughing too loudly, as if the sound itself could shield them from suspicion. When Griffin saw his parents, his face paled. When his eyes slid to Judge Palmer, panic flickered in the corners. And when he finally looked at me, seated at the head of the table, my hands calmly folded, his smile collapsed entirely. "Emerson," he stammered, what is this?" I gestured to the table, my voice steady. "A family dinner. Isn't that what Thursdays are for?" Silence. Thick. Suffocating. Patricia's hand hovered over her pearls. Richard frowned. Judge Palmer narrowed his eyes, and Monroe shifted uncomfortably in her chic blazer. I slid the folder of receipts across the table. 3 months of dinners, Tiffany purchases, hotel rooms, all billed to our joint account. "Griffin, perhaps you'd like to explain to your parents." Or maybe I turned my gaze to Monroe. She would prefer to enlighten her own. Monroe froze, her smile evaporating. Judge Palmer's face went red, his jaw tightening like a vice. "Monroe?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. Griffin reached for the papers, but I snapped them back before he could touch them. "Don't bother. I have copies." Patricia looked between us, her eyes wide with horror. "Griffin, tell me this isn't true." But Griffin couldn't speak. The silence was damning enough. Then I delivered the final blow. "Marcus is coming home in 3 weeks," I said quietly, my eyes locked on Monroe. "Did you plan on telling him? Or were you hoping his service overseas would keep your little affair safely hidden?" The air cracked. Helen gasped. Judge Palmer slammed his palm on the table, and Patricia whispered a prayer under her breath. Griffin's shoulders slumped, every ounce of his practiced charm draining from his body. Monroe tried to stand, but I cut her off. "Sit. You've stolen enough dignity from the people in this room. Tonight you face what you've built." Her lips trembled. "You don't understand." "No," I interrupted, my voice sharp as glass. "I understand perfectly. You were drowning in debts, desperate for attention, and you decided to drag 2 men into your lies. One of them risked his life overseas. The other risked his marriage and his company. But you?" I shook my head. "You risked everything for a fantasy that ends tonight." The room dissolved into chaos. Patricia sobbed quietly. Richard's face was stone. Judge Palmer berated his daughter, while Helen sat frozen, her hands clasped in shock. Griffin reached for me once more, his voice breaking. "Emerson, please." But I stood steady as steel. "You chose your Thursdays, Griffin. This is mine." I walked out, the weight of every eye in the room trailing behind me. The night air outside was cool, and as I breathed it in, I felt lighter, stronger. For the first time in months, maybe years, I was no longer the naive wife waiting at home. I was the woman who had forced the truth into the light, no matter how blinding it was. The moment I stepped out of the restaurant, the city air hit me like a baptism humid electric charged with freedom I hadn't felt in years. My heels clicked against the pavement as I walked to the car, my pulse still thrumming from the storm I had just unleashed inside that dining room. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The image of Griffin's pale face, Monroe's trembling hands, and the devastation carved into our parents' expressions was already etched into my memory forever. Back at home, the silence greeted me. No lies humming through late-night phone calls. No perfume clinging to suits he swore were only for business. Just silence. For the first time, it wasn't suffocating. It was mine. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen island, the same marble surface where Griffin and I once planned our future. Now it was the war room where I had drawn my battle lines. My phone buzzed relentlessly. Dozens of calls, messages from Griffin, from Patricia, even from Monroe. I let them pile up like the debris they were. I owed them nothing. Not explanations, not forgiveness, not even acknowledgement. But when I saw Marcus's name pop up on the caller ID, my chest tightened. His number had been given to me by the base liaison, and I had debated for days whether to use it. He deserved to know the truth before he stepped into a life that had been scorched behind his back. My thumb hovered over the screen, then pressed accept. Mrs. Carter. His voice was steady but cautious, as though bracing for impact. Yes, I whispered. Marcus, I'm so sorry to be the one to tell you this. I explained everything: Uchi dinners, Tiffany's receipts, hotel rooms, the scene at the restaurant. His breathing on the other end was sharp, uneven. When I finished, there was silence. Finally, he said, Thank you for telling me before I walked back into a house full of lies. His voice cracked on the last word. I'll take it from here. When the call ended, I sat frozen, staring at my reflection in the glass of wine. Betrayal had woven a web around all of us, but at least now the strands were visible. No more secrets, no more shadows. The next days unfolded like aftershocks. Patricia called again, her voice breaking, asking how long I'd known, why I hadn't come to them sooner. I told her the truth because I needed you to see it with your own eyes. Otherwise, you would have blamed me. She didn't argue. She just cried. Griffin, of course, tried every tactic. Flowers at the door. Long emails filled with apologies that read more like excuses. It was a mistake, he wrote. I was weak. You're the love of my life. But mistakes don't repeat every Thursday. Weakness doesn't buy diamonds. And love doesn't bleed someone dry for months while they sit at home believing in a life that no longer exists. One evening, he showed up at the house, pounding on the door until my neighbor threatened to call the police. I didn't open it. I didn't even move from the couch. Let him pound. Let him shout. He had lost the privilege of my attention. Instead, I turned to what mattered: myself. I filed for divorce the next morning, sliding the papers across the mahogany desk of my attorney with hands that didn't shake. I included every receipt, every hotel booking, every luxury purchase billed to our joint account. This isn't just infidelity, I told her. It's financial misconduct. And I want every ounce of it on record. As I walked out of the law office, Austin's skyline rising around me, I felt a surge of something fierce. This wasn't the end of me, it was the beginning. Griffin had underestimated me, thinking I'd be another quiet wife who swallowed her pain in silence. Instead, I had turned his own arrogance into a stage, his affair into a public trial, and his mistress into collateral damage. At night, when I lay in bed alone, the ache of what I'd lost still pulsed. You can't erase 5 years of marriage without grief clawing at your ribs. But beneath the grief was something stronger: vindication, hope, and the steady drumbeat of freedom. 2 weeks after that dinner, my life looked nothing like it had before. Griffin had moved into a rented condo downtown. Word was Monroe never joined him there. After the exposure in front of her parents, she vanished from his orbit completely. I heard whispers that Judge Palmer cut her off, financially furious that his daughter had disgraced their family name in such a public spectacle. Meanwhile, Griffin's own parents stopped returning his calls. Patricia texted me privately, "You will always be our daughter, no matter what happens between you and Griffin." It should have comforted me, but all it did was deepen the strange hollowness inside. Because while I had won, I had exposed him, destroyed his web of lies, shattered their secret world, I still had to live with the truth. That the man I had built a life with, shared dreams with, had gutted our marriage without hesitation. I threw myself into work. My practice grew faster than I expected, as if all the energy I had once poured into keeping Griffin afloat was finally redirected into myself. Colleagues commented on how sharp I seemed, how focused. What they didn't see were the nights when I collapsed onto the couch with a glass of wine staring at the ceiling, my body buzzing with rage and grief that had nowhere to go. Then Marcus came home. He called me the day after his plane landed. His voice was steadier than the last time, but still bruised. "Can we meet?" he asked. We met at a quiet cafe near Zilker Park. When he walked in, still in uniform, shoulders squared against the world, my throat tightened. He looked like a man who had seen too much already, and yet betrayal had carved the deepest wound. "Thank you," he said simply, sliding into the booth across from me. "If you hadn't told me, I would have walked into my home blind. I don't know how to repay that." "You don't owe me anything," I said softly. "We were both casualties of the same war." He gave a short laugh, bitter but real. "Casualties. Yeah, that's exactly it." We talked for hours, not about them, at least not entirely, but about ourselves, about what it feels like to trust so deeply you lose sight of yourself, about the strange clarity that comes when everything falls apart. When he finally left, he squeezed my hand. "We'll be okay," he said, not as a promise between us, but as a declaration for each of us to carry separately. In the weeks that followed, I started therapy. For years I had built walls around myself, telling everyone I was fine, that I could handle it all. But inside, the betrayal had left scars I couldn't bandage alone. My therapist asked me once, "What do you want your life to look like now that it's truly yours?" The question haunted me. I had been so focused on revenge, on exposure, on making Griffin pay, that I hadn't thought about what came after. What did Emerson want beyond justice? I began to find out in small ways. Painting on weekends, jogging by the lake at sunrise, reconnecting with friends I had pushed away while drowning in my marriage. Piece by piece, I was rediscovering the woman I had been before Griffin and building someone new out of the ashes. One evening, as I watched the sun set from my balcony, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, I realized something that made my chest ache but also set me free. Griffin's betrayal was never about me. It was about him. His weakness, his greed, his hunger for validation he couldn't find within himself. I had carried his choices like they were my failures, but they weren't. The final step came months later in court. Griffin sat across from me, his once perfect posture sagging, his suit hanging loose. The judge reviewed the evidence, the financial misconduct, the infidelity. My attorney spoke with precision, every receipt like a blade. And when the gavel came down, awarding me control of our assets, dissolving the marriage I had once thought unbreakable, I felt no triumph, only release. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Griffin tried one last time. "Emerson, please," he whispered, his voice cracked. "Don't let this be the end." I looked at him, at the man I once believed was my forever, and with a clarity sharper than any pain I answered, "It already was. You just didn't notice when you ended it." Then I walked away into a future that finally belonged to me. If my story has touched you, if you've ever carried the weight of betrayal but dreamed of reclaiming yourself, I want you to know you can. You are not defined by the lies that broke you, but by the strength you build afterward. Please, like this video, share it with someone who needs courage. Subscribe for more stories of survival and truth, and leave a comment with your own journey. Together we can remind each other that even in betrayal there is a path back to ourselves.